Welcome. I'm Ron Baker, Director of the Canadian Small Church Ministry Centre, sponsored by Small Church Connections here in Canada. And this is us, Canadian Small Churches in Action podcast. And today we have another great guest from the other side of the world. Well, sort of the other side of the world, at least in Canada. And I want to welcome Mark Reece to be with us. I'm just going to let him explain who he is, give his name, a little bit of what your ministry journey has been, and then we're going to pop right into a very vital question regarding refugees and working as small churches with refugees. So that sums up the whole podcast, but the rest of it's really good. So just wait and see. We'll get there. Okay, Mark, take it away.
Yeah, so thanks, Ron. I'm Mark. I'm currently the lead pastor at the Church by the Lake, Middle Sackville Baptist Church in Sackville, New Brunswick. And we are a part of the Canadian Baptists of Atlantic Canada. And that's been my home sort of group family of churches growing up, and that I've served in as well, right up to the present. And I've been at this church, current church, about 5 years. It'll be 5 years this summer. And prior to that, my family and we lived in the Annapolis Valley in Nova Scotia, and I served at a small rural church in the Annapolis Valley for, I guess it was a little over 13 years prior to coming to Sackville. So yeah, that's my sort of just a little snapshot of ministry, presence and work that's and where it's taken me.
All right. So in the Maritimes, let me just ask a question. Is it nice weather there today?
Yeah, I'm going to look out the window right now. Yes,
right.
I can verify. It's
I'll look out my window too. And
yeah.
It's beautiful.
I mean, we often joke and we say that, if you don't like the weather, just wait 5 minutes. It will change. This is maritime weather, but no, it's been wonderful. We've had lots of rain over the last number of days, and yesterday and today, it's much nicer. And I mean, I realize we need the rain as well.
Yeah,
but
don't make me jealous here. We're sitting in the middle of the prairies, looking at possible drought as we move into the spring summer area. It's going to be interesting, to say the least. So yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, well, we wanted to talk a little bit about working with refugees. I think as this podcast is being put together, Canada's having to deal with that whole question of refugees and how do we deal with that as small churches. So maybe you can just let me see, how do you see small churches being active in a ministry of refugees?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess for us, when I say us, I mean when I was at my church in the Annapolis Valley, it came about that one of our active church members, I think it was one of our deacons actually, he had heard an appeal on CBC radio, I think it was, driving one morning, and it was related to the Syrian refugee crisis. And it was almost like the host was, just really emphatic, begging even, that this, please step up and help. And the idea was that, well, there's got to be a role for churches in this too. I mean, what's the mission look like? Well, meeting the needs of, the widows and orphans and hugely, right? So this is what we do, or what we should be doing. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
A part of that anyway. So, there's got to be a role in this. And the question comes when you're small, and I'm taking the definition of a, small church to be, anyone under like 200 people, I guess, something in that ballpark. Which is the vast majority of churches, right?
Across Canada, yes, definitely.
Yes, certainly. And so most churches are small, by that definition. And yet, we have lots of gifts, lots of people. There are, people, lots of capabilities, lots of resources in our people. And so, there's got to be a way to dig in to some of this and to really wrestle with it and to get involved. And in a small community, I mean, with all that networking that's already in place, it's so, if the want is there, if the desire is there, it's not that hard. I wouldn't say to really bring a small group together to do that kind of work, to sponsor a family or to resource a family. and come together around that common goal. I think it's totally doable, and it can be done in a really hands-on way. And the hands-on is what's really encouraging, when people can see the results right before them.
So if you were to take, could you give an example of what you've done?
Yeah.
Past,
So
I guess. Yeah.
yeah, the best example that I can give is, at the start of that, what we call the Syrian refugee crisis, we had determined as a church very early on in that. In fact, I think in our family of churches, we were probably the first one to do that. To do it was to sponsor a family, and it ended up being a family, a mom with 5 girls who were originally from Iraq, and I realized that we're saying Syrian refugee crisis, but there are refugees all over at all times from all over. So
Oh yeah.
and we try to determine, like, what's the of the families that we can see who are available for selection right now, like what are the highest needs and what kind of relief can we offer. And we set the goal, and we just said, if we can be a part of just getting this family to Canada, like, and as soon as they arrive in Canada, we feel like we've already, sort of met our goal, our initial goal anyway. And so that's a win immediately, that, we would step up and sponsor, and that they would come. And then, anything after that's going to be gravy, because now the, the family is safe and it's out of that difficult situation. And so now, like, a new life or a new chapter begins for them. And so, yeah, like, that's what we did. This family of, of mom and girls, and it was just a wonderful blessing to, I think, to anyone who was involved in that. There were challenges too, for sure. That's fine, but it's truly a blessing. Yeah.
Yeah. If we were to jump into that question of challenges, what kind of barriers or challenges did you see, or that a small church can expect to encounter? Boy, there's all sorts of layers that go into refugees resettlement and all that sort of stuff. So I'll let you run with it.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Just interject if I start to ramble.
Okay.
So, one that you would anticipate, I think, would be around finances. Although, like, our work was a bit of an exception in that way, because we were so early and just at the very start of that so many people in the community wanted to do something, they didn't know what to do. And so we had no difficulty, raising, very little difficulty raising the funds we needed. And in fact, we had more left over at the end of various segments of the journey, which we could then use to help seed other groups to do the same kind of work. So that wasn't a challenge for us, but it can be a challenge. So you think about finances.
Yeah.
Not so much like for the church, but for this new endeavor. All right. And then what else? You need to have the people, the resources, like people with a willingness, yes, but also they had to have the time to commit to this, because there's definitely a time commitment. And we found it best to have a group of people. I think, like, I'll say 6 people, for example, 5, 6, 7 people, no larger than that, to really act as like a steering group, or like the core committee to really deal with the needs, and to even a bit higher level. And then engaging sort of sub teams of people to do some of the hands-on work, and negotiate some of the day-to-day stuff. But a small church has an advantage, I think. I guess the word that came up when we were doing our work then was that when you're small, you can be a bit more nimble.
Yep.
So it was much easier to make decisions on the fly, being small. There weren't all these layers of bureaucracy and red tape that we had to cut through any more than we would anyway. But that was really helpful. But I think one of the barriers really would be helping people think just around, and not even necessarily in the church only, but in the community, about why we be doing this kind of work in the first place. Especially when there are so many other needs always all around us. And so, why would we invest in this need? And, even though there's another need over here, and, is this the right kind of need to be meeting? What about our own people? Some of those kind of mindsets or attitudes, and they don't all come from a negative place. I think they come from a place of legitimate concern, to say, is this going to mean less help for someone else? And, I tried to frame that as, it's not an either or kind of, ministry or need or focus. It really should be a both and. That yes,
Mhm.
there are other needs, and we're involved with those too, and there are other groups who maybe can better meet those needs at this time. Let's do this together. Let's take a more wholesome picture of the situation, a snapshot, and just try to figure that out. But that could be a barrier, to helping people. Who deserves help at any given
Yeah.
time. It can be very political, right? Yeah.
Hmm. Well, and let's take, for example, the mom, 5 kids. Did you have sort of a slogan that you went into the community with, something that you talked with them about to say, here's why we have these, this mom and these 5 kids coming? What would you say as you walked into the community?
Well, we get a lot of mileage out of, like, the parable of the Good Samaritan.
Hmm.
That if you know of a need and you're equipped to meet the need, then how can you not meet the need? Like, you really should be doing something. We got a lot of that, and even Jesus talking about, when I, ministry to the least of these, that servant heart. That when I was in prison, you visited me. When I was naked, you clothed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. And just what it means to be, on mission,
Hmm.
at work, in the neighborhood, in the world as well, and truly joining God in His mission, in that way. And that, ultimately someday, whenever that day comes, we want to be able to say, we were on the right side of history, and that
Yeah.
we did what we, not only what we felt we needed to do, yes, that, but also what was right to do. And so those were things that motivated us, and I think some of that was contagious, like as we presented in different ways in different places. um and then it must have been, because I know that there were a number of groups that came out and sponsored, as a result of some of that, publicity, some of that work. And I'm not saying that it was us. I really believe that, the Holy Spirit was at work in that.
Hmm.
But truly, we were a part of that, and God was able to use that witness, I think, in a good way. So we're thankful for that. Yeah.
So it seems like this has been something that's caught your heart. Your current church, you're also working with refugees, maybe in a different capacity as a leader or as a church. How would you, let's take the situation now where there's a number of refugees, and it's become particularly um, in front of our faces, no question about it, with the Ukrainian and with a number of African countries and other places. What kind of place is a church in to help with that whole refugee situation? And not that they have to run the whole thing themselves or whatever, but what would you suggest?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good question too, Ron. I mean, so just a little bit of background. My current church is a larger church. We're still, small, like under the 200 mark, but certainly larger, multi-staff. Um, and when I came to Church by the Lake, Middle Sackville Baptist, it'd be 5 years ago this summer. The church here was already a part of a community coalition that was doing refugee sponsorship work,
Uh,
and so we were one of the partners, I guess you would say, in that. I think a couple other churches in town were especially involved along with us, and then many individuals, folks from the university. This is, Sackville's the home of Mount Allison University,
right.
as well. Some interested business people, just, so a really good group, cross section of people, not only churches but community, the broader community. And yet we all had this, one thing in common, that we wanted to see, refugees be sponsored and supported, and newcomers welcomed, and for that to be done well. And so when I came, that was already underway, and the history of it, the roots were, again, going back to 2014, 2015, the Syrian refugee crisis, and a similar kind of momentum had built here as well. And I think when I arrived, the group here had already sponsored, I don't know, 3 or 4 different
Hmm.
families by that point, which was wonderful. So my role was a bit higher level at that point. Like, I'm coming into something that's already established. I'm a church rep, certainly, but there were a number of people in our church here who are also part of that steering committee, that larger group. And I think here it was probably, 10, 12 people that up to that would meet, monthly to, kind of figure this out.
Yeah.
And we had a number of people from our church who were a part of that, in those leadership roles. And of course, there were a number of volunteers beyond and everything. But And since then we were able to focus on one or two, I guess two parts, different like family reunifications.
Oh, okay.
Refugees had already arrived, a year or two or three prior, and then now we're working on bringing, some extended family members in. Maybe it's a parent or sister, brother, sibling, their family, situations like that. And that was exciting to be a part of too, because now you're multiplying the joy for those people, really, being a
Yeah.
part of that. But what really, I guess what really stands out in my mind is, then COVID hit, and the world,
The
kind of
world
went
changes.
nuts.
Yeah.
The world, it changed. That's the gracious way to put it, right? The world went nuts. Everything like
Yeah.
shut down, and that coalition work really did come to an end eventually. I mean, we were committed to our current sponsorships, but there has not been anything new through that group since that time for like at least I've probably been a little over a year.
Hmm.
That's not to say that there's not refugee work still being done. Like, I think of our own family of churches, the CBAC, Canadian Baptist of Atlantic Canada. Like, there's still refugee sponsorship happening through that group, and our church may look to that again in the future. But right now, it's around. The conversation is around, even maybe not as officially as it had been before, but it's around, how to help, especially the Ukrainians.
Yeah.
It's a different situation because, and in one sense, yes, they're refugees, but not like in the Canadian, in terms of the federal government's eyes, because there's no refugee sponsorship program for them. I mean, there are, there's like a sped up program for, bringing for emigrating,
Right. Yeah.
away from and immigrating to Canada, but it's not like what we were used to seeing with refugee sponsorship, that there was like, needs matching and money matching and sponsorship agreement holders and all that kind of thing. It's much more grassroots, I guess I would say. But the neat thing with that, at least where we are, because we're I mean, you could even call like the area here like Greater Moncton. So the
Yeah.
city of Moncton has a group called the Ukrainian Club of Moncton.
Hmm.
And of course, in Canada, we have a number of Ukrainian heritage
Oh,
citizens or residents
across
already.
Canada. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Settlements. Yeah.
It's well over 1 million people, right,
Mhm.
who call Canada home now, and who have Ukrainian heritage.
Yeah.
And so there's the club in Moncton, comprised of Ukrainian people who are working, and they have the connections, and they're working with their own partners and their own family members, even on the ground, in the Ukraine. And so we have a group. There's a group in the community, again, interested parties and persons who have this passion for helping Ukrainians because of the what's happening there. And one of our elders, actually at the church, is leading that effort. And
Oh.
it's not officially under the banner of the church, but it's not under the banner of the church, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Like, lots of things fall in that category. Like, it's a church person, it's an elder. We're resourcing as much as we can, but anyway. So
It sounds like how small churches work. I mean, we just
yeah,
everybody works, and and it's church work, but it's sort of like somebody else in the church is doing it rather than the pastor, which is not a bad thing.
not a
And
bad thing at all.
yeah, yeah. So I'm thinking to myself, I'm a pastor somewhere in Canada, small church. Where do I start to sort of look at this whole refugee thing, and maybe, what are we getting into? And if you can fill us in a little bit from your own experience, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think so. If I were that pastor, asking that question, I would be looking to speak directly with another pastor in another church of similar size and maybe even kind of location, to say, who's had some experience in this, and to say, what did you do and how did it go?
Yeah.
Truly, I think that's probably the best way, pastor to pastor, leader to leader, whomever, to say, what do you think is possible? How did it go for you? What are the challenges? What's practical? What's realistic? And just to go from there. But I can say that if someone is interested in sponsorship, or even being a partner in sponsorship, because while we had in the Annapolis Valley our name on paper, we actually had another local church that we were affiliated with in the larger family of churches that we partnered with on youth work and children's work, and we
Mhm.
also brought on, and then they partner with us in the refugee work as well. And so sometimes you see that, a church or two or three coming together and doing that together. Maybe we feel like we don't have, quite enough people or quite enough resources, quite enough time to do it just ourselves. And so, blow the doors open, invite some others into that whom you can work with, and figure out, decide, what we can do, what the limitations might be, and really commit that to prayer, and see what God will do through you.
In the midst of this, you're going to have to cooperate with the government. How have you found that as part of the work that you're doing?
Yeah, we had really good relationships. At the time, I remember with those in government. I believe we almost had a person who we would talk to regularly in Halifax.
Oh yeah,
We
okay.
realized this is a person who's really helpful, knows their stuff, and has some authority to get things moving and rolling. And
Mhm.
so we made that connection, and they always seem very open, to help. You know, Anytime government, there's always some kind of bureaucracy, and you have to, you go into that understanding that, okay, there are steps that need to be taken, measures that need to be taken to get things done. There's, paperwork's important. Let's not, be slack on, keeping proper notes, and you just realize that. And the thing is, usually there's someone on your team who, thinks has that kind of brain, right?
Yeah,
To
there's
say,
always that. Yeah,
yeah. So
administrator, we'll call it. Yeah.
exactly, right. Someone who can be the administrator, and so you give that over to them, and you say, I you have this gift, you have this ability, this talent, whatever you want, whatever it is, maybe all of the above. And would you be that person? "Oh, I'd love to. We'd
Yeah.
love you to." So, yeah. And so empower the people you have with the gifts they have, and go for it. Yeah.
Let me ask you a further question now. Yeah, as you look at refugees that have come settled, uh, has there been an ongoing conversation with them, an ongoing connection? What is expected or isn't expected? I suppose that changes with each situation too. But what might you say to that?
Yeah, it's interesting. You're right. Every situation is different. Just as every individual is different, every
Mhm.
family is different. Several of the sponsored families or individuals have, eventually moved to larger cities,
Yeah, yeah,
larger centers. No surprise. Part of that's because of the support they would receive, in like a community of others, with a familiar and a background,
yeah, yeah.
similar to theirs. I mean, I would do the same, likely. you know. But we also have others who have stayed closer. We have one family here in Sackville who's moved to Moncton,
Mhm.
and settled in there. And really, I think one of the only reasons they moved probably was some more job opportunities and a little easier to travel around with public transit and whatnot. But still maintain a connection with some of us, here, and we're only about driving time 30 minutes away.
Yeah, yeah.
So we still have that connection. And then there's another family who's also experienced reunification as well. So an extended family, here, in our town, who has since opened a restaurant
Mhm.
and a small business, and has really, the family's extended even beyond that, because one of the families, that was already here, like a Canadian family, has embraced, their family, and
Ah,
they do life together on so many levels. It's amazing. And so it is different, and we've seen really all different forms, I think. And I think it's key. You go into that and you think, like, you know, there's no ultimatum here. Like, we're not going to sponsor you
yeah.
unless you agree to stay. Well, you can't. I mean, I don't want to be tied down either. So, I wouldn't put that on any of my family or my people. So why would I
Mhm.
do it to someone else? And yeah, but it's been amazing to see. And the goal is that you want people to thrive,
Yeah.
and sometimes they don't even know what that's going to look like until they start doing life in Canada, and trying to figure that out. It's a whole new world for them, literally. It's all new, and
Yeah.
they need room to grow, and to change, and just settle in.
Okay, so you've talked a number of times about networking, working in teams, and that type of opportunity. Let me ask a question here. Is small church pastor leaders, others in the small churches, when do you start networking? It seems to me it needs to be before you. Well, maybe you just start and then things come up. I don't know. Just what have you found with networking?
Yeah, yeah. I think it probably it's a both and. Definitely start before, because just know that you it can really consume a lot of time. It truly can. And I was very hands on myself with the first family that we received,
Mhm.
and but I was hands on in ways that I enjoyed. Like, so it wasn't draining in that
Yeah,
sense.
yeah.
But a bit of like repair here, some help with electronics over there. If a request came up for documents, or dealing with government things, I would say,
Mhm.
well, I can look at it, but really, I probably need to refer you to to Joanne, for example.
Right.
She's much better at this than I am. That's her passion. Let's have a conversation with her. So
Yeah.
there's that kind of networking within our own group. But then very early on, even as we were talking and even deliberating about what this is going to look like, we realized, we do need more people. And so, are there other churches, are there other like-minded Christians? That was the question we were asking at the time,
Mhm.
that we could partner with to really, see this be successful, and so that we wouldn't experience burnout, because that can be a very real thing,
Yeah.
especially in smaller churches. You often have a core of people who are doing a lot of the day-to-day work, and they are also the ones that are typically all in on
Yeah.
new ventures,
Definitely.
and like the early adopters and whatnot. And really, you're adding something else potentially significant to their another piece of the pie, right? And there's
Mhm.
only so much gas in the tank, only so much
Yeah.
they can
Yeah.
do. So why not say, very early on, let is there anyone else who we could look to or invite into this work? And that would be really good. Now, the ongoing part of that is that, especially as a family arrives and people see things happening, and this
Mhm.
is true of most ministry work, that once there's some traction gained and people see results, they're like, oh, well, now I see. I mean, I didn't see
Yeah.
it before, I didn't even understand it before, but now I see. Okay, well, here's what I can offer. you
Mhm.
know help with tutoring, or help with housing, or whatever. And so then I think you need to be open to that too, to say, okay, there are probably going to be people who offer things as we go, and let's not close that off. Like, if it's a legitimate offer and we need the help, then yeah, we should be really open to that. Like, I mean, wise about it, of course, and discerning, but open to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you've had a great experience working with refugees and the opportunity that gives. If you had one word of advice to a small church pastor in dealing with refugees, from all the things that you said, I could probably pick out about 10 things. But if I asked you just one piece of advice, one thing, what would that be?
Yeah. So I guess in terms of the work, I would say, don't delay, just go for it.
Okay.
Jump in. You're not going to be alone. That Surely there are others who have an interest, a similar interest. If not, they'll be inspired by your own. The Spirit's already, at work ahead of us. We're not. Nothing surprises the Lord. He knows the passions of our heart. So just go for it.
Yeah.
Just jump in and go for it. Do not delay. And then I guess, in terms of working with individuals and families, I would say, sensitivity goes a long way. Give space to the individuals and the families to make their own decisions. We want to empower them. We don't want to monopolize them in any kind of way. They are individuals. They're going to make their own decisions. They need to do that. But so be sensitive to the people that you're working with. Just like it's no different than anyone else we work with, right?
Yeah, it's sort of like a pastoral church thing, Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if whether or not they recognize you as their pastor or
Yeah.
not, be pastoral toward them. Yeah,
Right.
that's right. Yeah.
Well, our time has actually come to an end, unfortunately. We could go on for quite a while here, and I would love to hear more. But thank you for all that you've inputted here. It's been great, helpful for those that may be looking at refugee ministry in the future. This will be a great thing. So thank you very much, Mark, for just taking this time and talking with us, letting us a little bit on your refugee journey. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome. It's been a blessing. Thanks, Ron. Appreciate it.